With Monster Hunter Wilds on the horizon, we're going back to Monster Hunter World to relive some of the best builds and hunts of the game. So with that, I'm Darcblade with one of the greatest builds for the Sword and Shield in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Now each one of these episodes is dedicated to just one build and are slightly different from the builds found in the best of the best videos, as they tend to specialise a little bit more in defense, offense, or some other niche aspect of the weapon. In today's video, we're going to be looking at the Frostcraft build for the Sword and Shield. Now normally when it comes to the Sword and Shield and the Frostcraft skill, I don't really use it, as I tend to always keep my weapon drawn, as you can use items whilst your weapon is drawn with the Sword and Shield. But with the right playstyle, they actually work well together. Now if you find these videos helpful or informative, please consider leaving a like, as well as subscribing to the channel, as it will allow me to make more content like this, not only for Monster Hunter World, but also the upcoming Monster Hunter Wilds. So like I said, when it came to the Sword and Shield, I tended not to really focus on the Frostcraft skill, instead favouring other, just as viable skills instead. But Frostcraft can work well. The main reason for this is because rarely would I sheathe the Sword and Shield, because you can take items with the weapon drawn, and in order to get the most out of the Frostcraft skill, you have to sheathe your weapon regularly in order to recharge the Frostcraft gauge. But with a little bit of a change in gameplay style and actually sheathing your weapon, the Sword and Shield can benefit from Frostcraft when it comes to dealing burst damage to monsters. So for the Frostcraft Sword and Shield build, you'll need the following. First of all, you'll need the Rimeguard Helm Gamma, the Rimeguard Mail Gamma, the Dragon Claws Beta, the Rimeguard Coil Gamma, and the Rimeguard Greaves Gamma. For your charm, I'm using the Challenger Charm 5, and for my weapon, I'm using the True Fatalis Sword. This has an attack increase augmentation and a health regen augmentation attached to it. As for your specialist tools, these are down to personal preference, but I've gone for the staple that I always tend to use, which is the Rocksteady Mantle and Temporal Mantles. The main reason we're using the Fatalis Sword and Shield is for its high raw attack, as this build is focused more on raw attack than elemental or element attack. So when it comes to the decorations, you have a fair few to play around with. First of all, I've gone for attack decorations to max out attack boost. I've then gone for expert jaws to max out critical eye, a resisted jaw for a point in blight resistance. This is kind of optional, you can drop this if you want. Tenderizer jaws to max out weakness exploit. You'll then have two optional jaws in the form of a jumping jaw to give us a point in evade extender, and a handicraft jaw to give us a point in the handicraft skill. As I said, this is optional and can be replaced with something else if you so wish. I've then gone for critical jaws to max out crit boost, and vitality jaws to max out health boost. As for the jaws on the mantles, I've gone for dragon jaws to increase the dragon attack of this weapon slightly, but this is purely optional, to be honest. You can replace this with whatever you wish. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a build with 150 health and 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 150 stamina when you've taken all your relevant buffs at the canteen. You'll have a raw attack of 547, which can be higher when certain buffs are activated. You have a decent chunk of purple sharpness with 15% base affinity, which can be 85% affinity when you take into account weakness exploit and the agitator skill. You have a dragon rating of 120 with high elder seal, and you have a strong defense of 1121 that is strong against water and ice, but unfortunately weak to the other elements, especially fire. So when it comes to the skills, first of all, you have attack boost at level 7, increasing the raw attack of this build, and at level 4 or above grants us a 5% base affinity bonus. I have used rare attack decorations in this build, so if you are trying to craft something similar, you can drop a few points in attack boost, but make sure you get it to at least level 4 so you get that bonus base affinity. I've then got critical eye at level 7, increasing the base affinity of this build, countering the negative affinity found on the Fatalis Sword and Shield. I've then got agitator at level 5. Would have been nice to get this higher, but we're not using the Fatalis set bonus, unfortunately. Agitator is a skill that kicks in whenever a monster becomes enraged, granting us bonus raw attack and base affinity. And we can control this quite easily thanks to the whole flint shot mechanic found in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. You then have health boost at level 3, allowing us to get our health to that maximum of 200, adding to our survivability. You'll then have ice attack at level 3, a byproduct of the armor we're wearing. Unfortunately, we can't get much use out of this unless we were to switch to an ice weapon. You'll then have critical boost at level 3, which allows our crits to deal increased damage to a monster, but only applies to the raw portion of an attack, not the elemental or ailment portions. You'll then have weakness exploit at level 3, a skill which allows us to gain increased affinity when we're attacking monster weak points, and should these weak points be tenderized through clutch claw attacks first, this increase can be up to 50%. You'll then have focus at level 3, a byproduct of the armor we're wearing, unfortunately, although it allows us to charge up some of the Sword and Shield's moves a little bit more quickly, but to be honest, it's negligible. The downside is it's attached to some of the armor, so we cannot really drop this. You'll then have critical draw at level 3, a skill that allows our drawing attacks to gain a 100% crit rate. Again, it's kind of a byproduct of the armor we're wearing. We cannot really replace this, as this isn't the most useful of skills for the Sword and Shield in all honesty. Next up is Peak Performance at level 3, a decent DPS skill that gives us increased raw attack whenever we have full health. This, combined with the health regen augmentation, normally means that we can top up our health if needed to activate this quite often. You'll then have Quick Sheath at level 3, which normally I would say isn't that useful for the Sword and the Shield, but when we're taking into account Frostcraft and the fact that we need to sheathe our weapon in order to recharge the Frostcraft gauge, having Quick Sheath is almost mandatory. So it does come in useful for how this build's playstyle works. Next up is Coalescence at level 3, which is a buff that kicks in whenever we remove a blight or ailment from our hunter. When this happens, we'll gain increased raw attack, elemental attack, and ailment attack for a brief period of time, which works well in unison with blight resistance, which we'll have at level 1. Blight resistance reduces how long blights stay active on our hunters. Having blight resistance just at level 1 gives us an opportunity for the blights to wear off naturally, rather than us having to stop sheath our weapon and take a nullberry or something. It is a quality of life skill and can be removed if you want. Next up is Handicraft at level 1, again another skill that can be removed if you so wish. Handicraft basically just increases the sharpness gauge slightly. Next up is Resuscitate at level 1, which is a byproduct of the armor, but it's still useful when it comes to defense. Whenever we have a blight or ailment on our hunter, we'll gain reduced stamina consumption and increased evasion capabilities. Next up is Evade Extender at level 1, which is a skill that whenever we evade at dodge, we'll do it at increased distances, which actually does add to our defense when it comes to avoiding attacks. And then finally, when you're wearing your mantles, you'll have Dragon Attack at level 2, increasing the dragon rating and damage of this build slightly. But like I said in the mantle section, this is optional. You don't have to take this skill if you don't want to. Now anyway, as for the set bonuses, you'll have 2 of them, both attached to the Velkhana Divinity. First of all, you'll have Critical Element for wearing 2 pieces of the armor, which allows our attacks when they crit a monster to deal increased elemental damage. Think of it a bit like crit boost, but for the elemental portion of an attack. But the main event is for wearing 4 pieces, you'll get the Frostcraft set bonus, which gives us another gauge next to our sharpness gauge underneath our stamina bar. The more full this is, the more increased raw attack and elemental attack will deal to monsters. But with each swing of the weapon, it will drain this gauge slowly, eventually depleting it, to which will gain no increase in damage. But we can refill this gauge by simply sheathing our weapon, to which it will recharge quite quickly, so long as we don't draw our weapon again. So this changes up the Sword and Shield playstyle a little bit. You have to be mindful of the Frostcraft gauge, sheath your weapon as often as you can, and try to work in this aspect of the build into how you attack a monster. Do this correctly though, and you'll be getting some massive burst damage with this versatile weapon. But every build out there, they all come with pros and cons. No build is absolutely perfect. When it comes to the Frostcraft Sword and Shield build, the biggest pro is its burst damage output, able to dish out brief periods of massive damage thanks to the Frostcraft gauge. Which brings us on to the next pro, which this build can be used against pretty much any monster. This is thanks to it being a raw attack focused build, which means that we don't have to take into account monsters' elemental or ailment resistances. Which brings us on to the third and final pro, which is more of a pro for the actual weapon than the build itself, which is we can still use consumables even if we have the weapon drawn. But there are cons. The biggest con for this build is, unfortunately, it is lacking a little bit when it comes to survivability. The lack of Evade Window or Divine Blessing can be an issue for some players out there, so this is something to be mindful of. And the final con is, unfortunately, there will be times where you experience sharpness issues as well. You're easily able to burn through the purple sharpness of the Sword and Shield with this build, so keep that in mind as well. But if you're looking for an alternative way to play your Sword and Shield, and you like how the Frostcraft gauge works with its burst damage output, I'd strongly recommend this build. It was surprisingly fun, and allowed me to do even hunts like Vitalis quite easily and in a decent time. But what are your thoughts? Please leave a comment down below, and until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you another greatest build video, this time for the Frostcraft Sword and Shield in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.